To be, to become, to begin, where the river leans to the sea. To learn, to let go, to love. The world turns endless, turning me.
We call it progress, but peel back the skin and it looks more like a heist. In today's session, Jim and I look at the immortal psychopaths, the corporations we've built that have the rights of a person but the morality of a parasite. We're tracing the line from the first steam engine to the AI hacking your brain. If you feel like the world is a molochian shit show, this is the roadmap of how we got here. So we start where we left off, which is basically in the middle of the journey of how Game A evolved and turned into this Molochian shit show that we're in right now. And we went through a whole deep history, and we arrived at a point where it's just starting. So we now have science and democracy and financialized markets as the key pillars standing, and we continue from there into what happens next. So, what happens next, Jim?
Yeah, well, the combination of all three, basically, let's think of democracy as somewhat less authoritarian government as one of its side effects. The parliament, say in England and in the Low Countries, Netherlands, basically meddled less than absolute monarchs tended to do. The scientific revolution was really unprecedented with the overthrow of ancient authority. Prior to that, especially Europeans, philosophy, natural philosophy, had been overly channelized by Aristotle and Aquinas and a few others, and finance had been basically a rigged game by the king and the churches. And when those became freed up, innovation could explore much more rapidly. And the first huge one, and probably the second biggest innovation, third biggest innovation that humanity ever made, first being fire, second being agriculture. The third was probably the steam engine, which brought us into the fossil fuel epoch. Prior to that, humanity basically lived on the real-time power of the sun with a little bit of storage and things like water power. But things like wind power for ships or windmills, they're basically manifestations of solar power. So the fossil fuel epoch, driven by the steam engine, allowed us to take mined and saved solar power in the form initially of coal and start burning through it. And before long, we were burning through it at a rate quite a bit larger than the amount of power we were getting from the sun. Today, it's, I don't know, at least 10x, probably more than that, of the power that's available to humanity is coming from fossil fuels. But the steam engine probably would, the technology to build the steam engine existed back in ancient Greece. The actual hero built a simple-minded little steam engine, but without the financial infrastructure to put up big resources behind it to perfect it and market it, without the freedom of those entrepreneurs to make a profit from their innovation, it never happened, even though it had been sitting on the table for 2,000 years. And I would argue that having gone through this enlightenment doorway with these three better ways of sense making, almost instantly the steam engine came into being. Quite remarkable, and it improved extremely rapidly. The first steam engine was so inefficient, the only place it made sense was actually at a coal mine. And the first 20 years of steam engines was only used to pump water out of coal mines. And because you could just use excess bad quality coal to heat, run the thing, didn't really matter how inefficient it was. But it was sufficiently inefficient, it made no sense for transportation or to work in a factory and all that. But a whole series of innovations occurred. to say they're driven by science exactly is not quite right, because the early steam engine, kind of the mathematics of heat engines wasn't really well understood. But I call it a scientific / engineering perspective was brought to it, where people could think freely without constraint about how to solve problems. And that epoch was huge. The next one, which also came on quite quickly in the late 1700s, was interchangeable parts. Surprisingly, humanity had never come across that solution to the production problem before. Every, let's say, pot or pan was made one off, basically. The interchangeable parts system was first developed in the United States, amazingly, to build firearms for the armory at Springfield. A firearm of those days was relatively simple compared to a modern one, but it had a number of parts. And it turned out that you could not only create them much more efficiently as interchangeable parts, but you could also repair them much more easily in the field. If a piece broke, the part, you could use a standard part and put it on. It's quite amazing that interchangeable parts didn't come until late in the day. And while it certainly increased the efficiency of production and repair, it also started the alienation of the worker from his work. Before the Eli Whitney's innovation at the Springfield Arsenal, a gunsmith built the whole gun himself, right? Or maybe had an apprentice that helped him, and he chose the wood, he shaped it, he did the metal work. He's the one that did the fine fit of the trigger. It was him. It was a personal instantiation of work in which a person could have considerable pride. And once you went to interchangeable parts, okay, I'm the guy that puts the screw on the end of the barrel so it can screw in. I'm the guy that makes the metal plate on the buttstock. I'm the guy that cuts the trigger, right? The amount of, I would say, personal investment in the artifact goes way down. And this is a beginning of something that I think is a very important negative trend. And you can see why, of course, Game A chose that, because its metric is money on money return, or economic efficiency. And because interchangeable parts were way more efficient in every way, relatively quickly, that became the modality for all production. And by the early 19th century, all factories basically ran on that basis for anything other than certain luxury goods, which were still made by hand. The next, another epoch, was the development of the corporation in the early 19th century. Prior, if you had a business, you were responsible for all losses personally, right? If you went bankrupt, you went to debtor's prison, probably. If you did harm to your neighbor, you personally were responsible. Now, that had some obvious risks for entrepreneurs, but also was a major impediment to investors, particularly investors who weren't going to be actively involved in the business. Oh shit, if I give Thomas some money to go do a business and he fucks something up, I can go to debtor's prison. Right? Holy shit. And so the corporate form, which had been around very rarely, typically required an act of parliament to establish a corporation. It was, very rarely done for canals and really big projects like that. There were just, I don't know, 10 or 20 in the UK, maybe a small number. But then people started realizing, if we had this limited liability corporate form, investments could flow into business, particularly not anonymous, but uninvolved capital, quiet capital. I have no idea what Thomas is up to. I'm putting $500 in. If it works, I'll make $5,000. If it doesn't work, I lose my $500. But I don't go to debtor's prison. I don't go into bankruptcy personally. And that was a gigantic lever up for the financialization of everything, basically. And it happened in a democratic context. I mean, this was voted in by the parliament. So at the time, the consideration of the governance was that the benefit of being able to bring in not actively engaged investors was greater than the moral hazard of no longer making the people personally responsible for their actions. And that was a decision that had huge consequences downstream. It no doubt accelerated the growth of the scale of everything, probably increased standard of living substantially, but started the pattern of what I would call the psychopathic corporation that has no morals whatsoever and also lives forever. Let's say you have a bad business leader. Eventually he dies, right? Guess what? A corporation never dies. That's one of the weird ass things about it. And in the English common law, and particularly in the United States version of it, corporations have been literally given personhood. They have many, not quite all, but many of the same legal rights, including free speech, of humans. And with some bad court decisions, at least I'd argue bad court decisions, they can even donate money to political campaigns and things like that, so they can hack the political process. So this started for probably a good reason, or at least what seemed like a good reason at the time, in the early 19th century, but it had huge ramifications that we're still feeling today. Let's say the next epoch, you could call it around 1870. It started a little before that, but really started to move very rapidly, which is the automation of agriculture, another gigantic transition in human history. In 1870 in the United States, which was a moderately industrialized country, not as industrialized as England and Netherlands, but more industrialized than most places, something like 70% of the people were still involved in agriculture or the processing of food in one form or another, transportation, milling, etc. And today in the United States, it's maybe 2% if you include people working at grocery stores. So an epic transformation of how people made their living, and particularly in the United States, less so in other parts of the world. Most of those agriculture producers own their own land, right? And were yeoman independent people. Now, there were slaves, of course, before 1865, which is a hypocritical stain on the American ethos of the most horrible sort. But we did work through that, and by the 1870s, even a fair number of Black folks were smallholders and made their own living in agriculture. But the automation thing drove most of the population off the land and into the city and into these interchangeable parts factories and work that is more or less alienating. I own a farm, and I don't do the farming myself anymore. I do know lots of farmers, and being a farmer is a very tough way to make a living, but it's also very fulfilling. You're dealing with a million things, right? Even today, you're dealing with a sick calf in the morning, a broken disc in the afternoon, a flat tire on your tractor in the mid-afternoon. I mean, it's like, and you're balancing many things that need to be done and figuring out what's the correct order. And if you're a successful farmer, you are someone who's giving absolutely your intellectual all to make it happen. And it's yours, and you're responsible for the success or failure. So, being a farmer is a very big, stressful, but fulfilling job. Many of the farmers I know would do nothing else. If they were a billionaire, they'd still be a farmer because they love being a farmer and they love doing that work. But very few, it used to be, most Americans did that work. Now, 1% or so do that work. The next epoch, and again, all these things are unfolding due to the things downstream, right? The automation epoch came from steam and corporate form. The big, some of the very first big companies in America, corporations, were the McCormick Reaper Company that made agricultural implements, and they used the corporate form to get anonymous capital in. And of course, they use interchangeable parts, keep the cost down and the ability to repair up. And so all these things build, right? The next epochal transition was what I would call fast communications. Until 1840, to send a message from London to New York took weeks. It was basically how fast could a ship run across. By then there were steamships, so it was maybe 2 or 3 weeks. But in 1840, the telegraph was invented, where you could send instantaneously a message. The first one was sent, I think, from Baltimore to Washington. And before long, they had transatlantic cables, and the world fundamentally became knitted together in a way that it had never been knitted together before, which, amongst other things, allowed financial markets to operate on a global scale. You could do trading in an arbitrage on the difference between the price of gold in London and Berlin, right? You couldn't do that when it took 2 weeks to find out what the price was. You'd lose your ass, right? But one of the very first users of telegraphs, of course, were the financial industry, getting real-time information, optimize, right? Middlemen skimming out little profits. And so that, while it was useful for many other things, particularly useful for scheduling logistics, knowing when ships would arrive, organizing the delivery of materials to the dock, so that they send a message to this warehouse saying, okay, this ship's going to be in on this day, get the ship there. So you don't wait till the ship comes in, then you do it. So there was lots and lots of optimizations that came from fast communications, but also accelerated financialization. Next, the mass media epoch. Radio first, and then eventually television, where a single message could be sent out to many folks. Again, this was a wonderful innovation for people, particularly small town people, rural people. They could get music, they could get news, they could get the opera. There was all kinds of things in the early radio, and very quickly, there was radio stations everywhere. In the West, at least, and the prices of them came down such that almost any family could afford to have a radio, and this became a deep part of how people lived. And the family would get together after dinner and listen to radio dramas, kind of the way people watched TV in the 50s and 60s, and it seemed like a pretty good thing. However, like any good things, it can be used for bad. And it was quickly realized by propagandists in government that this was also a great way to propagandize at a truly mass scale. Probably the greatest radio propagandizers were Joseph Goebbels and Franklin Roosevelt. Goebbels was a true genius at radio. By all accounts, he understood. He was a PhD in communications, I think, or something. Really smart guy. But of course, he used it for the worst thing imaginable, which is to propagandize people to be Nazis. I mean, does it get any worse than that? No. A brilliantly talented guy who helps turn a country into Nazis. Right? That is not a good thing. Franklin Roosevelt, on the other hand, was also a great expert at using radio, and he helped guide the American people through the Depression without any revolutions. There were a lot of revolutions in Europe, including the Nazi Revolution. It wasn't really a revolution, it was an electoral revolution. But he managed to guide America through the Great Depression without a revolution, and then led America through World War II with relatively decent behavior. I mean, we did some bad things for sure, but not as many bad things as most of the other countries did. And radio was his superpower. And so, the mass media epic had some really good things and some less good things. Then the then the next thing is what I call the Bernays epoch. After World War II, these two kind of overlap. The mass media epoch. The guy Edward Bernays was the son-in-law, I think, or nephew of Sigmund Freud.
I think it was nephew. No.
Yeah, he in the 1920s he wrote a book called Propaganda. This is a book it's worth reading. It's absolutely shameless, right? It's not, oh my goodness, oh dear, right? It's like, this is how you manipulate people. This is how it was done in World War II, World War I. Here's how we do it for consumers. Here's how we build the needs that people don't even know they have. It's quite well written, and it is like, whoa, and it had a huge impact. He started an ad consulting company, and soon thereafter, ad agencies started multiplying. And I consider this to be where the system started to hack itself, right? Prior to that, most of what had been created had been to satisfy actual needs of people. But after the Bernays insight that we can be programmed essentially to want things, the system started programming us to want the things that were profitable. And the money on money return pruning rule of the adjacent possible started exploring that space. And very much of the world we have today is derived around manufactured needs. Do we really need 300 varieties of shampoo at the grocery store? I don't think so, but somehow we've convinced people that we do. Do we need $300,000 cars? Probably not, but through status games and the programming of status games via clever messaging, people buy $300,000 cars, right? So I would say that where the game really started to run off the tracks, I mean, every one of these things, as you can hear, had negative implications. But one of the big ones was when the game started to hack the players, right? And that what I would call the Bernays epoch. Then the next accelerant was the consumer credit epoch. Prior to that, the limit of how much stuff people could buy was how much money they could save, right? And the amount of money most people could save, relatively modest. And being able to buy things on time also started in the 20s. Probably not a coincidence, right? If I can manufacture demand, I also want to manufacture the way to pay for it. And it accelerated into the 30s, 40s, and particularly in the 50s, really started gaining some traction. I remember my parents, they used consumer credit. They used it very tightly. They would choose one new home improvement at a time, and they would borrow the money to pay for it. I'm old enough that our first washing machine was not a fully automatic one. It still had a manual wringer to wring the clothes out after they'd been washed. It didn't spin around fast to dry the clothes partially. It actually had a wringer. And the first thing we bought was a real automatic washing machine. And then I think we bought maybe a freezer or something. We didn't get a dryer until I was like 12 or 13. We hung our clothes on the line. We didn't get a dishwasher until I was 14 or 15. We were the dishwashers. Hey, you got kids that fucking need a dishwasher for. But my parents were extremely disciplined. They'd only do one at a time. And hilariously, I really have to credit them for this. They would tell us that, okay, we bought this, 36 months. We're not buying anything else for 36 months. And then we get close to the end. I've got 3 more months to go to pay for the freezer. What should we get next, right? They were very disciplined, but a lot of people in that epoch were not. And the easy money and credit card, and then later in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, credit card debt, and then home equity debt, where you could take your principal in your house and tap into it. The fact that many people, this is something we know from behavioral finance, discount the future very steeply, hyperbolic discounting. So the joy, if you want to call it that, of getting something now weighs much more heavily in their emotional bodily calculation than the fact they have to pay it back does. And so
it's a runaway.
Was that?
On top of that, it's a runaway, right? My dad used to call it the personal inflation thing. The more luxury you accumulate, the more luxury you want, etc. Right? And that's
it never ends. We know there's what's called the hedonic treadmill. That if you get X and you feel satisfied for a few months, after a few months you're no longer satisfied. You need a bigger shot. It's like being a heroin addict, right? You build up a tolerance for this stuff unless you're very aware. And I'll give my parents 100% credit for being totally aware of this and not falling into the trap at all. But there were definitely lots of people that were contemporaries of theirs that got into deep trouble because they just let the attraction of easy money get completely out of control, which has continued to this day, right? And was one of the features that led to the 2008 financial crisis. Not the only one, but it was one of them, and which actually gets us to the next one, which is the super financialization epic. I like to point to 1971 when the U.S. and most of the big economies went off the gold standard. While gold is kind of a barbaric relic, as I think Keynes called it, and probably good to have gotten rid of, it also freed from the last constraint, financialization. It used to be if a country had too much credit issued, the price of its currency in gold would go down, and dollars would flow out of the country because they were cheap, and all kinds of bad things would happen. But once you got rid of that last anchor, there was very little except government regulation left to keep finance from going insane. Then, on top of that, from about 75 through the 80s, all the regulations were repealed in much of the world. So, it's hard to believe, or it's hard to remember, but as late as I think about 1980, 81, the interest rates that banks could pay on savings accounts was regulated. And there was a substantial amount of regulation in financial market, things you could and couldn't do. All those things were repealed by 1990, and most of them were repealed by 1985. Actually, a few didn't get repealed until the mid-90s. But financialization was entirely let off the leash, and it is now, I would argue, by far the dominant power in our society. Companies live or die based on their ability to attract capital. And there's a very interesting multipolar trap that occurs, which is not only do companies are caught in a multipolar trap competing with each other, but they also are in a multipolar trap looking for capital, because there is this abstract faraway capital, let's say a pension fund, and it's going to invest in a investment vehicle which makes direct investments in companies, either in stocks or in private equity. And this faraway pension fund doesn't know shit about the companies. I actually sat on the board of one of these giant funds, and we paid a little bit of attention, not much, to what we're investing. And we were looking rather at the track record of the intermediary. So the intermediaries are now in a competition to look good. And how do they look good? Investing in, the most successful, which may mean the most psychopathic companies. And so financialization, accelerated the trends of the psychopathic corporation to a quite substantial degree. So the next epoch, which, this one I'm not sure how this got in there, and it should be earlier in the list. But anyway, this is the termination epoch. This is kind of a fork. These aren't linear; they kind of fork. Hence, had made tremendous progress through the 19th and then especially early 20th century. It was a golden age of physics, in particular, from 1890 to, let's say, 1930. And one of the things that came out of that was understanding nuclear energy and particles and the mathematics of conversion of mass to energy and all that sort of stuff. The world's never been the same since July of 1945, when the first atomic bomb was detonated at the Trinity site in New Mexico. And since then, for the first time, humanity has had the capacity to do itself very serious harm, to knock itself back thousands of years. Probably can't quite exterminate itself, though the second order effects might, the nuclear winter, the plagues that would come, etc. But we could easily kill 90% of the people on Earth today with the nuclear weapons that we have. And unfortunately, we are probably creating other terminating technologies. The forever chemicals we've let loose in our environment, are they what's causing the fertility crisis across the world and the crash in birth rates? Maybe at least a contribution to it. We now have CRISPR, which allows us to do gene modification. And it's getting cheaper and cheaper. Some psychopathic terrorists going to combine Ebola with the common cold in their basement and let it loose. We are now at the stage where we have a number of potentially self-terminating technologies. And yes, there's sort of weak attempts to regulate these things, but it strikes me that the power of the markets in particular have driven the capacities beyond the ability to regulate. We'll get back to that actually with a final example. Then we next get into, I would call it the network / algorithmic epoch, starting in the very late 70s, where we started building out first proprietary walled garden networks like AOL and things like that. And then starting in around 1990, the internet, where everybody could talk to everybody. And I was involved in that starting in 1981. And we thought we were doing the greatest work for citizenship possible. Citizens would have wonderful information. One of our products we put up on the source was a database that tracked bills working their way through Congress. So you could pull up the markups and see what was going on. And as the bill got modified, nobody used it, right? Hardly anybody used it. It cost us a bunch, hardly anybody used it. What did people want to use? They wanted to use chat for romance and things like that. And blogging. We had accidentally invented blogging, which was kind of cool. We also created a early version of call it a prototype of something kind of like social media. And that's where all the action was, as it turned out. Personal interaction. Information services, contrary to the mission of the company, were much less attractive than the interaction component. And so the building of this network soon, not instantly, but eventually, the operators of these platforms realized that there's tremendous information in the behavioral signals that people give on these networks, who they connect with, how long they spend on, what time of day, what content they react with, etc. And that started getting better and better. Then another change happened in around 2000, 2002 maybe. It became economically possible to run even quite sophisticated online services and pay for them 100% with advertising. Prior to that, most online services you had to pay for. And when you pay for something, there's a very different relationship between you and the platform. If you're paying, let's say $20 a month for AOL, you want it to be as efficient as possible and get your work done and then get off, right? And in the earlier days, when I was involved in the early 80s, it was by the hour. So, you really had an incentive to make the product as efficient as possible for the user. You were not trying to lock them into the platform. Quite the contrary, because if you did, they'd run up too big a bill and they'd cancel. We were very aware of that. So I designed email, I designed the bulletin board system. I was quite involved in social media. I designed one of the blogging platforms, and we designed them for efficiency. That was in those days, that was the metric. Once you get into supported by advertising, the metric flips on its head. And I want to hypnotize you to stay on as long as possible so I can put as many shitty TeamView ads in front of you as possible. And you combine that with the algorithmic knowledge, and we get the vile shit show that is our online world today. I am just about at the end of my annual 6-month sabbatical from social media, which I take this is my 6th year where I stay away from Twitter and Facebook from July 1st till January 2nd. And when I go back on January 2nd, I expect the enshittification to have moved forward a noticeable amount. It's just, it's just inevitable in this combination of unlimited algorithms and advertising as the business model. And again, technology, science allows this, and financialization fires it up. This is a good place to talk about how financialization has hacked democracy. Australia, give them huge credit, just banned people under 16 from social media. That took a lot of guts for them to do that. I'll be very surprised if it happens elsewhere, because the big companies buy off the politicians. And you saw Zuckerberg on the stand with Trump at his inauguration. All these techies are sucking Trump's cock. It's all disgusting. And because they know where the power is. And so, they are doing what they need to do to keep, they all know Trump's a vile piece of shit, but they nonetheless suck up to him because it gives them the freedom to be extractive. And so we should probably expect that the democracy possible response to advertising plus algorithms is just not going to bite because the financial power has hacked the politics. And this is a very key aspect of where the system goes wrong.
So maybe looking back at the epochs you just laid out through the lens of one more. Okay. So I'll let you run with that, but yeah, okay, go ahead first.
Then we'll review them. And the last one is the AI epoch, which combines some of these. Right? It may be a self-termination epoch. It's certainly an algorithmic epoch. For instance, the guys are tuning their engines to see how sycophantic they should be, right? And I guarantee you there'll be even much worse exploits than that. I could see these therapy LLMs becoming amazing propaganda vehicles. If I was Goebbels right now, that's what I'd be doing. I'd be building therapy apps and embedding my Nazi propaganda in those very subtly. And when you get somebody on a trust basis, like in a therapy app, their brains are quite open to subtle indoctrination. And I expect all kinds of horrific things to come from this. The AI girlfriend, boyfriend phenomena, the ability to hack the most basic human drives for, love and reproduction, and family, and subvert them with algorithms and AIs is like terrible. And then, of course, there's the big one. Will AI get out of control? Will artificial superintelligence make humans obsolete? I think there is a risk there. I'm not 100% sure how big the risk is and whether it can be managed or not. But I also have relatively little faith that the politics side, the democracy side, has enough power to overcome the financial side to be able to make sure that AI is developed for humanity's benefit. And it's a great benefit to humanity rather than being allowed to just grow exponentially and do whatever it's going to do. So that's the last of the epochs that I laid out in the paper.
So they all have the potential to go horribly wrong, right? Because you described them from a certain perspective. You can also describe them from the perspective of exploitation, that of people and of natural ecosystems, etc. That has been growing exponentially along with the economic exponentials that are underlying all of these. And so these error modes that might be fatal, specifically with the generalized amplifier called AI, could even be worse than with the first out of control AI that we usually call the market, right? And so I think it's worth looking at these epochs in reviewing them through the lens of the error correction modes of the three pillars of science, democracy, and the market, and seeing what weaknesses do these error correction modalities have, and so that we can from that see what stronger error correction we could start building.
That's a good idea. The early ones, it's not clear that there should have been any different decision. Let's say the fossil fuel epoch. It was such an obvious upregulation of human capacity. And as remember from the previous episode, humans were still small at that era. 1700, 625 million plus or minus. Each person consuming about a 10th or a 12th as much as we do today. So 150th of the imposition on the earth. So even steam engines maybe weren't too scary in 1730 or 40. But I suppose if you had philosopher kings you might have been able to see out and say, what is the implication of this if the world is covered with steam engines? So keep in mind, originally the steam engine was just at the mine pit, so it's the adjacent possible. First it's there, then it's on railroads pretty quickly because railroads are pretty efficient. Then it's on boats, then it's in factories. So it's a step at a time. It's a slippery slope. Should democracy have banned the steam engine? Probably not. So this is a very interesting problem of as things start in a way that makes sense, but evolve in a way that become much bigger and more powerful. How does one build a system of governance that has wisdom enough to say enough? I don't know. It's very interesting and difficult problem. Interchangeable parts. Again, it was a huge increase in efficiency at the cost of alienation. And I will say that in a world driven by finance, which even at that point, finance could trump a lot of things, you can see how interchangeable parts quickly became universal. Democracy could have banned it, but why would it have, right? And it didn't. It did its thing. The corporate form. This might have been an easier place to have intervened. The governments could have said, no, limited liability companies are just a bad idea. If you're going to do business, you're responsible. It would have slowed the growth of capitalism some, and we would have had the problem of country to country multipolar traps. Suppose Germany had allowed limited liability companies, but France had forbidden them. If that allowed Germany's economy to grow faster, at least since 1860 or so, power in warfare, it was relatively strongly correlated with power in economy. And French and Germans still had a very intense rivalry. I mean, keep in mind, the French and Germans fought a pretty ugly war in 1870, right? And Germans kicked their ass, basically, and because they had a more advanced economy. And so the French, were very unlikely to disadvantage themselves in terms of the powers of their economy. So it would have been tough, but that would have been an intervention point that if somebody had thought deeply about it, rather than saying, oh, this will make it easier to do business, it said, yeah, it'll make it easier to do business, but it'll also create perpetual psychopaths, right? Who will eat the world, which they did. How do you get the wisdom to see that in 1830 or 1840? I don't know. Very, very interesting question. Agricultural automation. That is a pretty much natural follow-on from the fossil fuel epoch. As the engines get smaller and more efficient, and you can replace the horses with tractors. You can build bigger implements. The implement revolution was happening in parallel. Non-motorized, but much better plows and reapers and harvesting stuff. How would you not want to increase the efficiency of agriculture? And yet the result, drove 68% of the population off the land. Oh my, right? One of the most big changes in how humans made their living. How does somebody see that from that place? Let's stop there and think about how could deeper wisdom have been involved in some of these decisions? Or could it? Or is it just a fool's dream?
I don't know. It's really hard to judge that, but I think we have an opportunity to explore, at least from our perspective of having seen those frozen errors or failed error corrections, because we're in the middle of one, right? The final epoch that you were describing is such a moment in time where we are actually in the process of failing to bind that potential properly, right? We're again, like in all of the other modalities, just leaving it up to a skew market that is controlled by very few interests and therefore is unlikely to serve ultimately what it might be good for, what it might be serving. And so I think it's ultimately a question of um, uh, worldview, if you will. So what is or how you if you so how can you predict this? How can you see this happening? If you understand the level of fear that people have around their the security of providing a good life for themselves and the people close to them, I think that's the central driver for understanding whether something will be bound or won't be bound.
If that sense can get traction in the democratic realm strong enough to defeat the financial realm, because merely the fact that people realize that they could be fucked by this, if they don't have a mechanism to intervene, doesn't do
good. So I think there's two questions, right? The one is the intervention, but the first is to the seeing that something is going off, right? And I think there's this special danger in the current moment where the influence of finance has reached a level where nothing can escape it. Like you pointed towards democracy, but the same is true for science ultimately. And science could be the one domain that tells us what might be happening. I mean, people more than 150 years ago could tell us about climate change, that climate change was going to happen if we continue to burn fossil fuels, because it's a very, very simple it's very simple physics, really, right?
Physical chemistry, obvious that you put CO2 in the atmosphere, the temperature is going to go up.
Exactly. So that was people could calculate that very precisely, but if you hijack propaganda and science itself, then that signaling goes away, right? And that is
well. Let's stop there though, because science actually has done a pretty good job on climate, right? Science, the scientific consensus is very strong about climate change, and the models are getting more and more accurate. They're not perfect. Simulations are never going to be perfect. The data tracking is getting more finely granular. So I would say actually science has done its job on climate. The problem is elsewhere.
Of course, the problem is elsewhere. I mean, the problem is the reuse of the Bernays explosion technologies that have been used for cigarettes and have been used for sugars and fossil fuels and all of that, right? And they're also being used.
Big old pickup truck. I ain't gonna give up my big old diesel Ram 350 just because some hippies say got global warming, right?
Yeah, and just organizing doubt, right? By buying a few scientific sounding voices or people with a PhD in something, and then they're just declaring whatever that propaganda machinery needs. So sowing doubt is definitely one of the things that money can do, right? So the failure modes, the error correction in science is working quite well, but the error correction in finance is absolutely mind-blowingly broken. And so it can.
It's not even broken. It's not even broken. It's doing what it's designed to do, which is optimize money on money return. The problem is the third one is broken.
Okay.
The regulatory, the democracy component. There is no constraint on finance at this point. Now, it is, of course, possible. We could have ethical finance, but our current system is explicitly designed against that, right? There are court cases in the U.S., at least, that say that directors have a legal obligation to maximize shareholder value, full stop. And that could even include, and this was actually the origin story for Game B, could even include do something illegal so long as the benefit of doing the illegal thing is smaller than the penalty you'll be charged if you get caught. That's essentially the Google Facebook model. They've both been fined billions of dollars for various illegal things that they've done, but you know damn well that they've made tens of billions of dollars doing those bad things, or they wouldn't have done them. It's, I mean, that's finance is not. It would take such a revolution in finance, and of course that's what Game B calls for, a revolution in finance. But within the context of Game A, the job of reining in finance is supposed to be democracy.
I would say in all of these instances that of the epochs, you could probably find voices that will tell you that there will be problems down the line if we continue with this. In each of these cases, people have been able to see what might happen if we over amplify, over excite that particular epoch, right? But the failure of down regulating, because it's just optimized for this one single thing, is overriding all of these voices, right? So you could either say there needs to be an upregulation in the voice of the of science in the public domain, and or a but that's or the same for democracy maybe, but the question remains, as you accumulate the ultimate abstraction of power in the form of money that you can then convert back into any other kind of power, will you ultimately be able to override any of these safeties in the other domains? And I would say likely yes, because this is the ultimate exponential. You will always be ahead of the curve at the rate at which we are producing that abstract power called money, right? So you will always be ahead of the curve unless we bind this one particular element. We will probably be continuing this game until there's no planet left, ultimately, right?
Yep. If we keep running, that's exactly what the Game B diagnosis is. If we keep playing Game A will end and probably disastrously. It'll either collapse or it'll destroy itself.
Yeah. So I know you know Joscha Bach, and I am very intrigued with one of his ideas about, he calls it the loop over which we wake up, which he means as a way of describing where consciousness starts in a way, right? So the optimization loop of intelligence towards an integrating of different incentives and needs into a coherent whole is the first level, but then there's a second loop that optimizes towards a chosen outcome. And if you continue optimizing towards this chosen outcome, the loop continues to get tighter and tighter, and that's at one point you will what he calls wake up. And to me, it seems that game B, C, D, E, F, etc. are iterations on a civilization scale of this loop that over which we wake up, in the sense that we start becoming the masters of the error correction, to stress that specific element here, right? Or the incentive structure. So we can optimize a financial game, a money game, towards different things than money on money return. For example, we could optimize for ecosystemic health instead, right? And
you want me to give
if
you the Bluefield coin story? Very nice example, right?
Yeah, please.
A little Game B story on how you can use multiple signals. the idea of money on money return has some merit, right? It's measuring doing things well. It's doing things the smart way rather than the stupid way. And having been a business guy for 30 years, I know that there are more ways to do things badly than there are to do things well. And so that signal is not worthless. The problem is when it's the only signal. So let's imagine that there's a coastal community, mid-Atlantic US. One of the resources to be managed in the sea and the bays is bluefish, a particular kind of fish. Some people like it, some people don't. I happen to like it. So let's say the people of that region hire some population biologists to study what's the sustainable harvest of bluefish in our coastal waters out 200 miles, which is where you have the resource zone. And they come back and say 10 million pounds a year. You go, okay, we're going to issue 10 million bluefish tokens and give them out per capita to the people in our zone. These a lot of people don't like bluefish, don't like fish at all. They would have automated agents that would then trade the bluefish tokens for things that they want. There'd be markets in bluefish tokens versus cheese, or bluefish tokens versus anchovies, or bluefish tokens versus US dollars. And then people who want to buy a pound of bluefish need to present both $3 worth of US currency and 1 pound worth of bluefish tokens. So you basically have constrained the depredation of the bluefish population by adding a second signal. Now, of course, that's a very simple example, but it shows it's possible to add more dimensionality to our signaling system in a way that does a pretty, I mean, if it was enforced correctly, it would do a pretty ironclad job of managing that resource. And of course, you'd want your biologists to be monitoring it every year. And next year it's 8.5 million. The bluefish, some of them got sick. Next year it's 11 million. The bluefish had a lot of babies, right? And it'd be dynamic, and it would allow the people of this littoral community to dynamically manage their resource in a way that doesn't get depleted by adding a signaling modality, as an example.
That would be probably a clever idea, but it also would be very, let's say, mechanistic, and can be probably gamed quite quickly, right? And you would have to start implementing secondary currencies for all of the so-called resources, like the various species that we eat, and so it'll probably in a digital space be manageable, but it's I get a feeling that it might be useful to see this as a bridge technology into relearning that we are part of the whole, that we don't even have to start accounting for how much are we allowed to eat, but that we intrinsically understand that we are part of the whole and we have to take care of the whole, while we also live thanks to the whole. I don't know if that makes sense, but my sense is that signaling modalities, even if they are plentiful and interwoven, will fall short in many other aspects. So I think it comes down to belief systems or worldviews.
I think the two have to go together, right? To the degree that most people believe that we have to restrain ourselves, then the probability of signaling modalities working goes up, right? If you tried to impose this on game A today, it would fail immediately. People would hack it, etc. So I do think the two have to go together. And we've talked about this before, the personal institutional spiral. People have to reach a level where they realize that there is something called enough, and that there are limits, and that this is an institutional implementation to let us see how to navigate within limits. If you put it on people who don't believe in limits, of course they're going to hack it. But if you install it in a civilization that already sees that limits are necessary, I think your chances of it being successful go up. Got to have both. I do think that signaling modalities make it easier to decide. Okay, you tell me, okay, I'm aware that I need to live within limits. How does that roll up to make sure we don't deplete too many bluefish? It's not obvious, right?
So multiple signaling functions in the financial, in a digitized form. I mean, we have that technology available. You reckon could be a way to error correct more effectively, and mm, I keep coming back to and you know more about that than I do about if you look at a market as an information system and you treat it as such, right? It's ultimately an information system. We talk about signals here. The invisible body part, whichever it is, of the market, um, it requires information to do its job ultimately. And so I, as a fun little exercise, compared the financial transactional markets with relational gift economy markets in terms of bitrate. How much information can you put through the system per time, given those two modalities? And according to my back of the napkin calculation, the relational gift economy is twice as fast, or has twice the throughput of in terms of bitrate as the transactional money economy. So from a market perspective, you could argue that it's more effective, that we don't even need any tokenized exchange, but rather have rich relationality. Because rich
I'd like to see
relationality
your math.
already encompasses, well, I could pull it up. We can look at it next time maybe,
Send it to
but
me.
I
We'll talk
don't
about
have
it
it
next
handy.
time.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, here's my conjecture:
um,
is that
okay.
that you probably missed scaling issues, and that gift economy may have a higher bit rate at a small scale, but fails at large scale. The number of things that have to be considered to end up with goodness at the large scale. This is the classic Dunbar number problem, right? Which is I can do a moral calculus on a community of 150 or less. I can't do a moral calculus on larger communities. And while this is not the same calculus, it is a kind of cognitive calculus about gift economy. And I suspect that there's a scaling limit in which it has a higher bit rate. But anyway, we can take a look at the math and
Yeah,
give my
I'll
opinion.
I'll send it over. But but ultimately, and that's the actual point here. I think it's a more ultimately, and I said it before, it's a more about a belief system than actual mechanics. And
Yeah, I think it's both.
and yeah, no, the institutional personal spiral, but um the question to me in that belief system is ultimately this I keep getting the sense that people who have embraced what I don't know, philosophical, spiritual, economic, political perspectives from many angles, they keep coming at the same, reaching the same, a similar point, similar viewpoint, but they came at it from different perspectives, and it seems to me that there's some form of coherent uh, belief system that's independent of the the institutional landscape that made it happen, if that makes any sense. And
Yeah, absolutely. And I think
the question to
it's
me would
probably
be,
that there
can
are
we?
limits.
Hmm? Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Yeah. So, when as you were talking, I was thinking that, I know many of these various movements and things. I think the thing they all have in common is the acknowledgement of limits. And they have different ways of thinking about limits in different domains. But that is the difference between all these alternative ways of thinking and Game A, which does not acknowledge limits, certainly not on the financial side. The scientific side doesn't want to have limits. Science wants to know everything eventually, the path to infinity. And the democracy is supposed to provide limits, but is failing to do so. So I think the ethos of deeply acknowledging that limits are critical is what unifies these various communities.
Okay. Here we are at the end of Game A, and I have to acknowledge my limit of my thinking capacity for today, because my day is quite old by now. So, but I would be very interested in exploring this question of the. I mean, we touched upon the relational economy parts. That might be an interesting thing, but the other part, the coherent pluralism in the sense of from perspective of belief systems and worldviews. What is that coherence, and can it be reached? Can it potentially be reached quickly? What I'm thinking when I say that is something that I get from Sam Harris's book Waking Up, where he lays out that there's one specific school of monks, I don't know, in Tibet or India, doesn't matter. They have this shortcut to enlightenment, but they don't tell you because if they told you, they would never know whether it actually activated in you, right? Because you can just say it did. And you might not even know whether it did, because how would you know it, right? So they let you go through the trouble of meditating for at least 7 years before they give you the shortcut. And I find that, and he doesn't really explain whether he knows that shortcut or not, but he makes it sound a bit like he does. And I get the sense that if you look at the work of Robert Keegan, for example, and the developmental hierarchy, that there is a possibility of density in life experience that can accelerate the journey through this developmental hierarchy, so that it's easier to arrive at that coherent belief system level that let's call it spirituality without ideology, or religion without religion, or something of that sort, right? Where the acceptance and the integration of limits becomes obvious, natural, and I would find that discussion extremely interesting.
Yeah, let's do that. I will say it'll be a stretch for me on the institutional personal spiral. Clearly, my expertise is on the institutional side, and I sometimes tend to be a bit of a obnoxious scoffer on the other side. But I'll try to, in good faith, in the question as deeply as I can. I'll think about it between now and next week.
Beautiful.